Hello, hello. I'm going to be reading from the Writer's Almanac for today, for Thursday, March 29th, 2012. The Writer's Almanac show that Garrison Keillor does on National Public Radio. Today is the birthday of R.S. Thomas, born Ronald Stewart Thomas in Cardiff, Wales in 1913. Most of his poems were about the Welsh landscape and its people. He was an Anglican clergyman as well as a poet until 1978 when he retired and devoted himself to the cause of Welsh nationalism. He often grew frustrated with his fellow countrymen, though blaming them for letting their culture fade away into history. In his poem, Welsh Landscape, he called them, quote, an impotent people, sick with inbreeding, worrying the carcass of an old song, unquote. He didn't learn the Welsh language until he was 30, and though he wrote his poetry in English, he wrote his autobiography in Welsh. He called it Neb, published in 1985, Neb being nobody. He was a Luddite, viewing modern conveniences as distractions that cause us to neglect our spiritual health. He and his wife Elsie lived in a small and almost primitive stone cottage for much of their marriage, and their son Gwydion remembered his father preaching against the evils of the refrigerator and the washing machine from his pulpit. His poems were as austere as his lifestyle, and he once wrote, quote, a recurring ideal, I find, is that of simplicity. At times there comes the desire to write with great precision and clarity, words so simple and moving that they bring tears to the eyes. Unquote. Very interesting man. I can't wait to read some of his poetry. Gee whiz. I have to look that man up. It's the birthday of author, actor, and comedian Amy Sedaris. She was born in Endicott, New York in 1961, and she grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. She's written two satirical homemaking books, I Like You, Hospitality Under the Influence, 2006, and Simple Times, Crafts for Poor People, she wrote in 2010. In an interview with The Believer magazine, she wrote that the whole Sedaris clan is fascinated by anything morbid. Quote, we read everything we can about diseases and physical deformity. We were so protected in North Carolina. In New York, you see it all, but growing up in Carolina, we were never exposed to much fringe culture. David and I still collect anything we can about physical abnormalities. There's a place here in New York where you can get antique skin disorder books in color. They're really beautiful photographs, but they put black tape over people's eyes so you couldn't recognize them. Like they needed the anonymity, because who else is going to have that growth coming out of their neck, right? Unquote. It's the birthday of Alexandra Fuller, born in 1969. She was born in Glossop, England, but grew up in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. In 2002, she published her memoir, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight. The story of her life as the child of white settlers caught up in a civil war in nearby Mozambique. By the time she was 7, Fuller knew how to strip, clean, load, and fire a machine gun. She also knew never to sneak into her parents' bedroom at night in case they mistook her for an intruder and shot her. She published another memoir called Cocktail Hour Under the Tree of Forgetfulness, published in 2011, and in it she tells the story of her mother, born in Scotland and raised in Kenya. It's the birthday of the politician and author Eugene McCarthy, born in Watkins, Minnesota in 1916. When he retired from Congress, he became a writer, penning several books about politics and many poetry collections, including Ground Fog and Night, which he published in 1979, and Other Things in the Aardvark, published in 1970. Today is the birthday of novelist and screenwriter Judith Guest, who was born in Detroit in 1936. She started writing when she was 10 but never got past starting. and had the beginnings of several projects crammed into her desk drawers for many years. In the early 1970s, she read a how-to book on writing by Richard Perry called One Way to Write Your Novel. She promised herself that this time she would start and finish a story. 3 years later, she published her first 3 years later, she published her best-selling first novel, Ordinary People, in 1976. The story of a teenage boy, Conrad, and his family in the aftermath of his suicide attempt after his brother Buck dies in a sailing accident. The film adaptation won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1980. Here's a poem by poet Richard Cecil, and the only thing I could find on him is that it says he married Maura Stanton and lives in Richmond, Virginia, and he graduated from Indiana University, taught at Rhodes College, and he currently works at Indiana University as a teacher of creative writing, and he also teaches in the Hutton Honors College. He briefly taught at Lock Haven University of Pennsylvania, teaching American poetry courses and running poetry workshops in 1987-1988. Pretty much it. I'm sure there's many other things about him, but that's what I can find right now. Where Am I by Richard Cecil. Beyond the waves that lap the sandy beaches my balcony looks down on, there must be no distant shoreline, only open sea that stretches toward the west until it reaches the sky to make an infinite horizon, which the sun sinks into with a hiss of surf as afternoon and evening kiss goodnight, and the sky turns on its constellations. The only sounds allowed besides the surf are cries of gulls and very distant swimmers and snapping flags so twisted by the wind it is impossible to say who rules this turf, the kingdom of the endless perfect summers, which I move to every winter in my mind. Where Am I by Richard Cecil, from his 21st Century Blues, published by Southern University Press in 2004, reprinted with permission for the Writer's Almanac. The production credits are host Garrison Keeler, the writers are Betsy Allister, Heather McPherson, and Holly Vanderhaar. Technical director is Thomas Schweitzer. The engineer is Noah Smith. The coordinator is Nick Venner. Permissions were obtained by Kathy Roach, and the web producer, Ben Miller. And as Garrison Keeler always says, be well, do good work, and keep in touch. God, man, I'm so out of